Welcome back to another episode of Conversations. I'm Rustin Pangburn. This podcast is about real, honest, and sometimes raw conversations. Here we talk about lived experience, second chances, mindset, and what it truly takes to rebuild after adversity when the odds can be stacked against you. If you or someone you know has been impacted by incarceration, trauma, addiction, or just life knocking you down, this space is for you. And if you are someone who wants to understand, support, and be a part of real change, you are in the right place. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe. And as of that, we'll go ahead and get right on with it. I have a great guest today, really good friend of mine. We have been friends for, I would say, last January is when I reached out to my good friend, John Reed. John, good morning or afternoon.
Well, it's afternoon in the UK, Rusty, and you're 6 hours behind us, so you're early morning in the US. So, yeah, I think you're right. Last January was fate brought us together, and we've been friends ever since. So I'm delighted for your friendship, and I'm happy to help you in anything you're trying to achieve here, because I think what you're trying to achieve is wonderful, and we should push it with both hands as much as we can.
Of course, and you already had a long head start way before me. That's what's going to make this recording so great is I want to talk about how all this got started because of course the ones who know you well know you as John the Poet, and I know you go inside universities, you go inside prisons, and you share your poetry, and I want to get into how you got that, what drove you to start the poetry inside prisons and university, and then I want to talk about what kind of impact that is going to make. So if you would share with me how John the Poet began.
Of course I will, Rusty, and I think it's an interesting story, and I hope that your viewers will find it interesting as well, because I'm not a church-going person, but I believe in fate, and I think fate has had a huge impact on my life. Excuse me, a huge impact on my life, and not least, it brought us together a year ago, and it's done that with many people over the years. So whether you believe it's God doing it or whether you believe it's fate is entirely up to the individual, but I believe it's fate. So it all began in 2016 when I won a scholarship to the School for Social Enterprise here in the UK, and I went on a one-year course practicing my skills. And at the time, this was the first business skills course I'd ever been on, really. And what came out of it was storytelling. One of the fellow students happened to say to me one day, a lady who simply said to me, "John, you're a great storyteller. You know, you should be doing this for a living." And I said, "Well, can you make a living telling stories? Surely it's just something I do as a matter of fact. I just do it anyway." And she said, "Oh, yes." So I started writing about it on Twitter. What is now X now, isn't it? But in those days it was Twitter. So I still think of dearest Elon and his Twitter renamed X. Yeah, good man. Whether it makes any difference, I don't know. Anyway, I started writing, and right out of the blue came a message from the then prison governor of Leicester Prison. Now, any of your viewers to this podcast would be well advised to go on to YouTube and look up HMPPS, His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, Leicester, because there is a prison that was built in the mid-1800s and very old, very historic, used to have public hangings, and it's a wonderful thing to start off at. So the governor wrote to me and invited me across, and so over I went one day. In fact, I'm going back this coming Friday as a bit of a trip of nostalgia, but that's another story. So I pitched up and we talked about, did I think that the way I told stories would be of any help to the men inside the prison? And the guy's name was Phil Novis. Oh, excuse me, Rusty. This is all we need, isn't it? Just a minute. Hello?
Hi, John, it's Larissa.
Are you Larissa? I'm midway through recording something with Rusty. Can I ring you back, or is it something quick?
Oh, sorry.
No, you're all right. Yeah. Don't worry.
No. Are you on Riverside then?
Yeah, I'm on Riverside with Rusty, yeah. I'll ring you back in a bit, okay?
Okay, right.
Try.
And
Sorry,
that is,
Rusty.
and that is how important John the poet is. He has connections worldwide. And before we get started, I remember you saying how this prison was built in the late 1800s. My wife and I were just discussing, because my wife knows all about you, even though you don't know very much about her, because I talk with her, and she mentions to me that when we talk about, we have old structures over here, old buildings, it means nothing to you over there. If a building to us is, it's been up since 1920s, you have buildings that's been up for hundreds of years. So when you say something is old, it's old. So
we could make a whole podcast on old prisons. Excuse me. So the nub of it was, would I go across to the prison and try this thing out? Try telling the boys a story and see what they made of it. So I duly turned up, naive, as green as grass, as they say, one Saturday morning, armed only with a story about a gentleman you'll know a lot about, a gentleman called Elvis Presley, I believe used to do a bit of singing over your side of the Atlantic. And
Jailhouse Rock.
His music was on the iPad and the story was in my folder. And the officer invited me into what he called the SEG, which I didn't know what the SEG was, I got no idea. Turned out to be where the naughty boys that have done something naughty inside prison go to. And we went in and we had a rocking good morning. We had Elvis Presley singing everything, including Jailhouse Rock, which I thought you'd have to sell that, you'd have to include that, wouldn't you, if you were playing in a prison?
Of course.
And it was party time in the SEG. The men just loved it. We had men dancing with men up and down the aisles. We had 3 or 4 prison officers enjoying every minute of it. And we had cake and we had tea. And it was just a brilliant day. I loved it. And when it was all over, the feedback came from the governor to say, John, this was fantastic. The men they thought that you going into the prison of your own volition and costing us nothing at all, which I made no charge for this at the time, is great. He said, but the bottom line is a simple one. We don't have enough money to have you in here every week. Otherwise we would. However, we know a man in another prison with a bigger budget and you should go and see him. And that led me to the famous Ralph Lubkowski, who was then the prison governor of Stafford Prison, which is another prison that your viewers might like to look at. Again, you can go on Google Earth and see it, by the way. And one thing in passing, Rusty, the oldest part of the prison is a very long block, probably about 150 to 200 meters from one end to the other, but it's not a straight line, it's a curve. And you wonder why it might be a curve. And the reason for it is simple, that when the men were let out to exercise in the yard, the officers could stand in the middle and nobody could hide behind the end of the block because they could see the ends of the blocks. Anyway, we did a series of meetings there with musical storytelling, and it developed into poetry because some of the men enjoyed writing poetry. And to this day, I've got lots of poems on my computer of what the men have written. And when he moved prisons to Huel Prison, I went with him and we did loads of stuff there, loads of poetry, loads of story writing, loads of everything really over a period of time. It's pretty much dried up now, to be honest, because successive British governments have taken away the money they want to spend on this kind of adventure. And so the men inside are getting back to basics, really. There is some education going on in some prisons. Typically, 25% of the men or ladies in any one prison can be found something to do, something constructive, either learn a skill or go to education, learn to read and write, whatever it might be. And the other 75 are left to walk around the landings and do not a lot. So it's not something I think they should be proud of. However, it is what it is.
Well, I think
that's how I got into prison work. And I've got to say, Rusty, it's been the joy of my life. I have loved every single minute of it.
I bet. I know that when I did my federal time, I speak about this a lot. There was no poetry, there was no speakers, there was no mentors to come and share anything. I try to relate back and think how would it have been if someone would have came in and tried or attempted or shared poetry. And you have spoken about how this could combat loneliness for maybe some people who are doing life in prison. And I think it could go well beyond that, because not just lifers, but people who are doing 5, 10, 15, maybe 20-year sentences, they would benefit from this as well, because you're when you're inside, especially once that last count time happens, you're left with just your thoughts. You're left with just the memory of who you are and who that person is to that got them there. And you have all night to think about, how can I outrun that charge? How can I move past, for me, the drug trafficker? So being able to share poetry, and I don't know how the outcome would have been because it never happened, but what are there some success stories, or are there any good um feedback you got from inmates that you could share?
I certainly can. I'm never prepared for these interviews, but as luck would have it, I wrote a post on LinkedIn quite recently giving some of the responses that I've received from the men over the years, about what we've been doing. And so certainly, yeah, I've got them here in the men's own handwriting. So let's have a
Great.
little look. Just pick one at random.
Let's do it.
Yeah, okay. James writes, I learned more about poetry and now can write limericks and poetry. John is a great teacher and said course. My favourite topic was, each week was different topic, and that's the way I loved it. There was the one topic of prison life I enjoyed more, and my poems are written about those. Um, that was James, who is now out of prison, and I've met him since he's come out, and he's living a normal life. Another guy here, Darren, has written, fun and on a new learning experience. John is a great and very easy to get on with guy. One more, should we do?
Yeah, let's have just another one.
I write the line, this is from Michael. The bit I write on the sheet they fill in is, I enjoyed the course because. So what they're doing, they're answering to that. And Michael writes, I was able to explore my creativity with poetry, with different styles and subjects. My favourite topic was writing about inspiration, using newspaper stories. So I would take newspapers in and let them read the newspaper, pick a story, and then write a poem about it. And they just seem to love that. So, but you've opened up a whole can of worms here, Rusty. So let me explain. Loneliness is the key word. Now, when you are lonely, as many people are, and as I am occasionally, and as you are, I'm sure, when you're driving through the night and your wife's asleep in the back and you're all on your own with your thoughts, you can determine that to be a lonely place to be. It's all, your entire world is down to the actions that you take. And I think of people when they go into prison as being extremely lonely initially, because if you've never been in prison before as a prisoner, how do you know who's going to be your friend? How do you know how the regime's going to be? How do you know what you're going to get to eat? How do you know what you might share a cell with? You don't know any of these things. And so you must feel increasingly lonely as time goes on. But loneliness is actually a gateway to lots more serious things. So initially, and I'm sure you would have experienced this, your loneliness will lead to depression, because you'll be thinking, my God, what have I done to deserve this? The depression leads to anxiety. What can I possibly do to get over this? How am I going to survive? And I know when you were in, because you've told me, you made a plan. I'm going to serve my time and I'm going to get out a better person. And let's hope everybody does that, but I'm fairly certain that they don't. But those two things, anxiety and depression, can then lead some people to start self-harming. And when they get the idea that self-harming is a relief to the stress they're suffering, It's one short step to suicidal attempts, suicidal thoughts.
Mhm.
And that's the last thing the prison wants. It doesn't want any publicity associated with people dying. It doesn't want you to die. And it's tasked with caring for you while you're in there. And let's be honest, they don't care very much, do they? They're great
No,
big warehouses of people.
no, they
So
don't.
the other advantage that people like you and I bring to it nowadays is we are caring people, and we don't have to be there. So we arrive through the gates as visitors, and we're not the prison guards, and we are not the prisoners. So I always say I try to develop a trust and a respect between the two of us that develops over time, and that when we say to them, don't do this or do that, they act to whatever we're saying because they trust us and they respect that what we're saying is our best interest. Whereas if a prison officer says it or another prisoner says it, they don't really know whether to believe it or not because they're not sure where they stand. So I think you can use almost anything to get to this stage of trust and respect. I happen to like poetry. I write poetry. I put poetry, interestingly, I've been putting poetry recently on my LinkedIn posts, and I can tell you I get hundreds of responders, hundreds. Whereas on a normal post, if I get 100, I'm doing very well. So there you go. So I think the evidence is in having done it and asked for a response. Responses are so good, it makes you want to do it more.
Well, let me ask you, when you first started out, I'm sure with the inmates, with the residents, it might have been hesitant at first, and I'm sure speaking with you that it took off. But how was it received by the officers? Because the reason I ask is going back to when I was incarcerated, we had many different types of officers. We had officers, or what they call over here COs, correction officers, COs, that were not very nice to inmates, and they didn't say your name or your number. They just called you inmates. Then we had the neutral guards that, speaking back to the ones that weren't very nice, I've actually had a CO tell me, get back in your cell, lockdown inmate. If it was up to me, I would take all your TVs away and you'd get nothing but books because you're criminals. And that's just the bottom line. Then go all the way to the opposite side of the spectrum, and there are COs that know that this is your home, and we go home every night, and we just work here at your home, so we treat you like a human being because you've already been found guilty. You've already pled guilty or been found guilty. I say this a lot. When you're inside prison, you're not in prison to be punished. Your punishment is to be at that prison. So there are guards that are COs that are okay and really okay with anything that benefits. And then there are COs that are not so nice. So how was you received with the COs?
Rusty, we're all people and we're all living on the same planet. Lots of people speak different languages. There are many different cultures and many different genders as well. But at the end of the day, all of our prison officers match your prison officers. So we have the same groupings. So there are those who I relate to immediately who want to do their best in caring for the people on their wing. They are generous with their time. If a resident asks them to do something, they will do it. There are those in the middle who are just going there for the money and doing as little as possible, will take the easiest job on the wing, whatever that might be, and just run with it. And all they're really interested in is the end of the month paycheck, what's going on.
Of course.
And the last group are the ones that take the view that you briefly outlined there, who say, listen, you've been judged. You're guilty. You're in here, and I'm going to make life as tough as possible for you. So, yeah, we got the same three groups. I think it's probably universal. I expect if I went in a Chinese prison or a Australian prison or a Russian prison, it would be just the same. We are people first, aren't we? And it depends how you choose to live your life. again, going back to the analogy with churches, there are lots of people who live by the teachings of the church and go to church every Sunday and put a great deal of strength and merit into what the church teaches them. I'm not actually one of them. I believe there's got to be something controlling all of this, but what it is, I've no idea. And I just believe in fate because it's easier, really. But my mum was the same her entire life until she got within about 3 years of dying. She obviously didn't know when she was going to die. But a local vicar used to come to the care home, and she found this local vicar a really nice, friendly guy. So she went to his service. Every month he came, and every month she went to the service, even though she wasn't religious. And she said the prayers and sang the hymns and enjoyed it thoroughly. And then when she died, he took the service and saw her away. So we've all got our own beliefs and so on, but I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to similar groups, really.
Yeah.
The only thing that interests me about the planet, really, is when you see harm being done to others when harm doesn't need to be done. And I think at the moment, the example is Iran, for example, where the population is trying to take over and say, we've got a really harsh government here, we want rid of it. And the government is saying, you dare come out in the streets, we're going to shoot you. Simple as that. So that kind of treatment of ordinary people, I don't find any way of understanding it, I'm afraid. But it's a reality of life, isn't it? That, around the world, we've got different people with different standards.
Different, excuse me, different cultures that I really don't understand. You mentioned care homes just a little bit ago, and I want to kind of give ourselves a little bit of props. We last year was able to do what I think was something really special, and I think I would love to be able to continue doing this. Was we was able to go into a care home, actually the same care home that gave me my first job. And we was able to go into that care home, and I was able to get you up on Zoom, and you was able to give back to the residents by playing some Elvis, some music, I think it was Beatles, played some Beatles. Then you shared some poetry, and the residents just loved it. And I thought I really enjoyed sitting back and watching the residents, because I actually watched the residents come in being really just almost non-responsive, and then you began playing your music, and then you began saying some poetry, and it was almost instantaneously they perked up, they sat up, and they enjoyed it. And I think that's so important, because those are the generations that paved the way for what we have today. They built the brick by brick that we have today, and I thought that was just wonderful, and I would love to continue on doing that with the poetry again. How the power of poetry, the power of, we'll get into your joke telling here in a little bit, because I think that's just laughter is another great medicine. But the poetry, so far what we're talking about, is a great medicine.
It's extraordinary for me that you bring it up, Rusty, because just before we started recording this podcast, I had a lady with me who I only know from the job that she used to be in. And she's changed jobs from last November, and she's now an activity organizer in a care home. And I was telling her about what we'd done, you and I, last year, and suggesting to her that we might do it again with her care home. And she, wouldn't that be great, John? And I think what people like is, first of all, you're showing that you care. And of course we care. Of course we should look after our older folk. And I suppose I'm old anyway, so I'm halfway to it, aren't I? But secondly, the fact that you're prepared to do it and include them is the same logic as applies in a prison. The fact that you've bothered to go in, that you're not repulsed by anything they might have done. I've had many a long conversation with a murderer, not just one, loads of them, loads of different ones. I've yet to find a murderer, convicted murderer in prison, who actually frightens me, because they don't. They are people that have done terrible things on a moment of, well, generally speaking, a moment of non-consideration, really. They haven't really thought what they're doing, and they've done it, and then they've had to live with the consequences for the rest of their life. I remember a very memorable conversation. In fact, a wonderful, wonderful poem written by a double murderer who'd been paid on 1 February the 14th, Valentine's Day, to go out and to shoot a drug dealer. That's what it amounted to. He'd gone out, he'd been told to collect the debt, and if they don't pay, shoot them. And there happened to be 2 people at the time, and he shot them both. And it ruined, in his words, the 2 that died got the best deal out of it, really, because they were removed from any worries from then on in. Yeah, they were dead and they were gone, but the people
This was
really paid the price.
this was his view, his
Yeah,
viewpoint.
yeah, and it was in his poem. I could get his poem and put it up. Well, not now, but I could. I'll put it up on LinkedIn if you like. But the people who really suffered, firstly, was him, because he now has got the law is chasing him, police are chasing him. The family of the men he died, and the children of the family, his own family, because he then got sentenced to, I think, 24 years for doing it. The whole thing was a disaster. And yes, it achieved the end that it was intended. People died, but that doesn't make it right, does it? But yeah, so I think when you take poetry into prison, if you wander about a wing and start saying, do you want to come to a poetry course? They go, oh, I don't know. And then if you say, but we've got real Yorkshire tea and proper biscuits, they go, oh yeah, we'll come to that. And really, they're coming for the tea and biscuits.
Of course.
But then when you get them in the room, and it's the little things I do, Rusty. So on the very first meeting, at the very first time the lads are coming into my classroom to do poetry, I stand at the door, I shake their hands as they come in, and I welcome them and tell them to sit down, give me a minute, and we'll have a cup of tea. And then when I've got all the men in the room, I sit down and say, right, lads, on the table, tea, coffee, milk, sugar, biscuits, help yourself, get a brew going, and let's just sit and have a chat. And we do. And then probably the first morning of our meeting, first 2 or 3 hours, we just sat chatting like a load of strangers, really, thrown together by an event. And by the time they go for their dinner, they've got something to talk about. Now, they don't all come back. You know, if I have 15 men in the room, 12 will come back. And the other 3 will go, nah, it's not for me. Don't like the biscuits, don't drink coffee, whatever it might be, you know. But the rest of them do. And they become keen on coming every week. And then when they know that, I'll give you an example. A friend that I currently work with on the outside, Jed Hemming, I met him in prison. And he was upset because he'd got 2 little boys, both aged well under 5. I think one was 1 and one was 3, I think, at the time, that he'd been separated from because he's locked up. And he wanted to write them a poem, which he did in my class. And the poem was all about dinosaurs because he knew the eldest child loved dinosaurs. So what I did for him, I brought home his handwritten poem and I typed it all up on 1 sheet of paper, but I inserted pictures of dinosaurs for his children to see. And then the following week took it back and gave it to him with 2 copies of everything, one for him to keep in his cell and the other one for him to post to his children. And he's told me since that act of friendship that I did for him on that day meant the absolute world to him because he had no way at all of achieving what I achieved in probably 10 or 15 minutes home here.
That's
And it's
wonderful.
those little things, taking care of people, that matter when you're inside. And I would suggest to you, and by all means answer, you know, when you were inside, did anybody actually care that you were there apart from your family? People
No.
inside, I mean.
No. I didn't really look to see if anyone really cared, but the bottom line is you're your own person. And the only thing that people care about and what you care about is not interfering with other people. And what I've learned is everyone has their own problems in their own mind, and you have no idea what that person is going through. So you definitely don't want to get in the way of what's going on with their lives. They don't want to get in the way with what's going on with their lives. So no, I really didn't see any. There was a little bit of camaraderie, but not too much. But I try to think, what would that have done if you or someone similar would have came in to the federal system and just offered a poetry class? Would I have joined? I might have, but I wonder how that would have affected, how that could have affected other inmates, how that could have affected, because you mentioned a point that you have spoken, sorry, you have spoken with murderers, you have spoken with hardened criminals, and that's what they do. They I was thrown in with a mix of different crimes: drug traffickers, murderers, um, gangsters, and they're really good people. I mean, I'm not saying the crimes they did were good. I'm just saying, for example, I'm not going to say this person's name, but I ended up learning playing chess and learning a lot from this person who had already done 30 years for a crime that he was never getting out. He was never getting out. He had written off his family, told his family, "Forget about me. I'm never getting out." He had grandkids. He had children. He had children, a wife, and he told them, "Just forget about me. There's no sense in dragging this on." So he was already did 30 years by himself, and he was, according to his charge and according to the paperwork, not a very good person. But I got to know him very well, and he was a really good person. He was friendly. He was kind. He would give you food if you didn't have any. We played chess together. So I'm not um, worried about being around people with bad convictions, murderers. They're just people. Now, are there people that do not need to be outside? Maybe so. I'm not the one to say that. Are there people that I believe have longer sentences that they shouldn't have? I do agree with that. There are people that say have been in for 40 plus years that did something, especially I know people that have drug charges. I met a person that was 19 years old and had three 200-year sentences for narcotics, large sums of narcotics. Now, does he need to have 600 years of a prison sentence? I don't believe so. He already had done about 12 years, and I think that was a little bit harsh of a crime. So I think some of that stuff, poetry could help, because he was depressed. He was just let down. He was just imagine that, being 19 years old. And of course, what you did was wrong. Of course, you accepted it. I accepted my crime. But to have that type of weight on you, that you have 600 years to serve and you're 19 years old, poetry could have definitely helped if he would have went in for that. Just wild, John, just wild.
No question about it, Rusty, no question at all. I could take issue with the American system, really, because in many ways the American system is worse than England. To justify what I've just said, we've got something around 80,000 people in prison at the moment. Roughly 4,000 of them are ladies, and the other 76,000 are men. Figure might be slightly different to that, but roughly every 20 men there's a woman inside, something like that. We are understaffed in the prisons. Why are we understaffed? Because we don't pay a good rate of pay for doing it. I only read a post this morning on LinkedIn from a guy who served in prison and goes back into prison regularly working, who reckons that of all the prison officers under the age of 25 employed in the UK system, 1/3 of them are doing it because it's the easiest way of taking drugs into a prison. And he's right, it is. There are checks, of course. We get drug dogs going in on the staff entrance, and everybody walks past them and the dog never finds anybody. Now, you might say, why not? And the answer's simple, because everybody knows what day the dog's going to be there. So I'm not defending it. I'm saying that there are lots of reasons for people being there. Now, when you look at the American system, of the 80,000 we've got, there are less than 100 that are never coming out. Now, these are people that have really carried out abhorrent crimes of the highest order. Murder of school children, policemen that have used their badge of honour to rape ladies and then kill them. I can't list it. Family murderers, whatever. The case of Rose West is one that, again, your listeners can look up on Wikipedia and find it. Rose and Fred West were a husband and wife with lots of children, and quite a number of them died by their own hands and got buried under the patio. So it's quite a story.
Wow.
Fred committed suicide in prison before it came to trial, but Rose stood trial and she got a whole of life sentence. But they're very, very rare. Now, in America, I don't believe that's the case. You know, how many people you've got on whole of life sentences? Because once you give somebody a sentence of more than, say, 70 years, it may as well be whole of life, mightn't it? The idea of giving somebody 600 years in prison is ridiculous, because he's never going to live 600 years.
For some people, that may be 30 years old when they receive their sentence, that could be 35 years. I mean, and the thing with that is if you give a 30-year-old a 30-year sentence, that's 60 years old. You're going to be released at 60 years old. And then how are you supposed to move on, John? How are you supposed to move on at 60 years old? And you have been completely blocked out of society, the world. And what a lot of people don't understand, that do not have lived experience, is when you get out into society, society doesn't stop or pause. Society has been moving on. So I was just in for 60 months, 5 years. And I went in when the flip phone was just coming out. And when I was released, we had smartphones. I didn't know anything about text. I didn't know anything about having an internet on your phone. I didn't know I had a black and white screen on my cell phone. So that's just one of the small changes. And with these people doing these sentences, people just don't understand that the world goes and gets in a big hurry without you, and then you're released back in, a lot of times with no blueprint on what to do next. And that's why you hear me say all the time, I beat the drum that we need to have mentors, and we need to have programs that go inside prisons and start investing in people before the release. And I don't know a lot about the state system here in America, but I do know about the federal system. And there's just not any programs in the federal system. For me, it was, I took lots and lots of classes to keep my mind occupied. I took classes, just for instance, I took psychology, a psychology course, Psychology 1, Psychology 2, Spanish 1, Spanish 2. I took HVAC classes. I took diesel mechanic classes. And all these classes I got certificates to. I have a stack of certificates that I can show and prove that I still have, but they don't count on the outside because they were taught by psychology professors that are doing time. So the classes, even though you have a certificate and you passed, they don't mean anything because they're signed by the warden and stamped by it's called FCI, Federal Correction Institute, and then signed by the warden. And what are you going to do with those classes because they don't count? Yeah, they kept your mind sharp. They kept you out of trouble. They kept you busy. But what are they going to do for you when you get out? I hear that the state system is a little bit different. But moving back to the guards bringing in drugs, the most lucrative thing in the federal system is tobacco. Now, in the state system, from what I understand, you can smoke tobacco. In the federal system, tobacco is banned. It is not allowed. So there are you can make a lot of money off. And I didn't partake, but I saw a lot of people making large sums of money off just tobacco, a little pouch of tobacco that they could then coerce or pay a guard to bring in tobacco, and just maybe a little $8 pack, they could get that to the inmate, and that inmate could then make upwards of $2,000 off that little pack, and it made more money than drugs did. I mean, I just watched it. You could take a regular cigarette, and you could and they would then in turn break that one cigarette down into 4 smaller cigarettes and sell each one of those for $5 and make $20 off one cigarette. So it, it it's just a different world in there, John. It's a different world. You have been inside and seen a little bit of it, so you do know some of it, but it's just a different world in there, and it's also a different world compared to the federal system, to the state system. And I think conversations like this needs to happen on a grander scale to show that change needs to happen. It really needs to happen, and change is possible, but it's going to take many, many conversations and many, many voices to stand up, speak out, and that's how you start breaking it down brick by brick.
I agree with all of what you say, and I'd like to get to the point of coming up with a solution that we would have for overcoming these problems. So the number one solution to overcoming the problem is pay the prison officers more. Pay them more. Why would you pay them peanuts when they're actually doing a very difficult job? So pay them more so that the staff are retained, because it's only once they've been in there for a few years and got the experience that they become really good at their job. If they're going to join under the age of 25, serve about 2 years, make an awful lot of money out of drug dealing, and then leave without being caught, who wouldn't? They're all going to do it. You know, it's an obvious thing to do. So, number one, pay them some decent money. Number two, we know that every prison, and I'm sure it's the same in America, every prison is understaffed. So let's say you've got 1,000 people funded for being employed at the prison, but you've only got 800 turning up. You've got 200 vacancies. What that's doing to your bill for the salaries is it's giving you 200 salaries unused. So why don't we take a portion of that saving and spend it on people like you and me that take our solutions in? Now, while we take our solution in, the guards are not having any input into the men at all. They just check them out of their wing in the morning, put them in our classroom for the day, and then at the end of it all, lock them back up again. So it would lighten the load for the guards. It would give people an interest. It would provide employment on the outside for people like you and me, because I don't know about you, but I can't get paid work in a prison at the moment because there's just not the money available. And yet the funding has already been approved. Our government has already said, you know, we will spend X amount on salaries, but we're not spending it because we haven't got the people applying for it. And they're not applying for it because the salaries are no good. Honestly, you can earn more money working in a supermarket, especially on a night shift, than you can as a prison officer. And there's no risk to your health. There's nobody going to try and get you involved in criminal acts. And you just turn up, do your shift and go home. So I don't think the people that could make this decision realise the ramifications of it. Quite how we tell them that, other than what we're now doing, put it on a podcast and hope they hear it, I don't know, because I can't just write to the Minister of Justice and say to him, can I come and have a chat? I've got a solution. Because the answer is no, you can't.
And what with the extra money, what we're also finding out, I want to talk a little bit twofold about this, is while they are understaffed, is I don't know the validity of this, but I remember having a CO tell me that upon hiring, you have to sign a waiver that says if something something goes down and the prison goes under a riot and you are taken hostage, we will not negotiate. There is no negotiation with hostages. So you have to sign your name and say, I understand this. And if I'm taken hostage, there will be no negotiations. So that right away with the low pay, also, if this is true, that also says with the low pay, am I willing to take this risk? And with the funding part, I think that, and I've said this before, that they spend way too much money on building more prisons and more prosecutions and getting more people incarcerated. And if they would take that same amount of energy and put into rehabilitation and put into programs and that extra money that you just mentioned, if it could do so much more good. If you're not going to hire more guards, why don't you start funding rehabilitation, funding people like you, people like me wanting to go into prisons and share inspiration, share hope, combat loneliness. That could be such an impact that it could definitely make a difference. I have not experienced it, but I can only imagine the impact that would have.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, is the big argument. I know you've spoken to Brian Cohen about this in the USA. Why do we run prisons for profit? Why? We've got all these private prisons. Why do we do that? What sense does it make?
There's big money. Big money.
Is the shareholder. Yes, big money. Big money over here as well.
Yeah.
Why do we do it? It's ridiculous. I'm not saying they run any better or any worse. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, what's the point? Brian, of course, would have it run as a social enterprise. So any profit that the prison made in terms of government funding it received for doing the necessary would be put back into the system and improve conditions and improve salaries and all those kinds of things. So, the willpower is out there. The knowledge is known. It's just how do you get people to listen? And you may be, a close friend of mine that we spoke about off air before we started this, Gethin Jones, will be in the States working for one of the big corporations that runs private prisons in the US and around the world for that matter, shortly. And he'll be going into prisons and talking to the managers about how to run a prison. And he comes at it from somebody who's been addicted to drugs and he's done many things in his life. He's served a number of years in prison. And he's a really, really good, highly qualified public speaker with some really good ideas. But the question that I always think in my mind is, why is it America needs to get somebody from the UK to come over there and tell them what they ought to know already? Surely, it's like if I said to you, look, I'll come and do what I do, but I'll do it in an American prison. Find me a prison in Springfield, let them pay my airfare, and I'll come over and I'll give them a week of my time, and we'll see what happens. And there wouldn't be any takers. Nobody would say yes. They would all go, he just wants a free trip to the US. That's all it is.
Well, the truth is, John, the truth is about that is I have been in contact with activities director in a nearby Springfield Penitentiary Correction Center. And I have spoken with them about me going in speaking, and they're doing the background checks, they're doing all the forthcoming stuff that needs to get me approved. But the last time we had a conversation, I mentioned you, and I mentioned that we could do that. The field is wide open because I have connections across the waters in England, and I mentioned you, and I mentioned we could do Zoom calls. There's all kinds of options that I can provide. And then I even mentioned what we talked about is I understand before you get hesitant. I told this person, before you get hesitant, we've already come up with a solution for privacy. We could have them facing backwards. And they could see us. We couldn't see them, and they could ask all the questions. They could interact, and nobody would see their face unless they wanted their face to be seen. She really, really, really liked that idea. I'm supposed to be talking with this person this week and reaching out. So it's not hopeless yet, my friend. I still would love the day when you come over to America, and likewise me come over to England, and we get to finally work together instead of virtually. That's
Yeah,
I I believe last year what we did was lay a lot of bricks on a foundation, a platform, a launch pad, if you will. And I think this year is going to be our year, my friend. I think this year is going to make an impact. I do believe, I have good faith that we are going to meet each other in person. And I do believe we are going to be speaking side by side if I have anything to say about it.
I think you're right, Rusty. And also, there's other things going on over here that don't involve the US. So, as you know, my friends down in Uganda are coming along strong, and we're doing stuff with them. And some of the simplest things that are so cheap to do. I'll give you an example. You know, you very kindly sent me a Christmas card, and we got a number of Christmas cards from a number of people. So, what I've done, I've offered to send all the used Christmas cards with all the messages still inside down to the school children in Gulu City in Uganda, and let the children cut the cards up, write on the back of the front page, if you like, a greetings to their own mum or dad or sister or brother, and next December hand it out for free. You know, not charge them anything at all, just send the cards down there. And actually, on this afternoon, I'm scheduled to talk to the Ugandan embassy, because I've got people here, family members, who want to donate things like crayons and paper and rubbers and pencil sharpeners and all things that little children would use in school, but they haven't got them in Uganda because they haven't got the money. You know, in Gulu City they have, no trouble at all. But once you go out into the countryside where they're living in mud huts and there's no electric or running water or anything like that, what we're talking about is fundamental change. So your heart needs to be in the right place. You need to be doing the right things. And I'm quite sure that given time, and 2026 is ample time to do this, we should be sitting here at the beginning of 2027 saying, well, do you know what? We did this a year ago and this is what we've achieved. And I personally think we can build a huge mountain out of this, do an awful lot of good. No one's going to make loads of money out of it. No one's going to spend lots of money either. And if you get trips to the UK or I get trips to the US, and we do it in person, all well and good. If not, let's do it on Riverside and let's make it happen.
I think what we should also work on is a live stream, doing another live stream that maybe we could take that live stream and share some poetry, and when I go in to meet this activities coordinator, I could show them, send them a link to this, and let them see the type of material we can come up with, and let them see for themselves how they believe this would work. I really think that would be a great idea. We are coming up a little bit close. What on time? What I want to do, I would like to get into your joke telling. You have told me some really, really good jokes. And before we close all this out, before we start with the joke, I do speak in universities, and I do speak with the criminology students and correction students, the future change makers. And I ask this question quite a bit, and I'd like to ask you that question. What would be something you would like to say to a future change maker, a criminology student, when I go in? What would be a message you would like to give to them?
I'd like to give them the message of hope, Rusty, and it's the same message that I like to give to everybody. It's the same message I gave to you when we first met a year ago. You know, give whoever you're talking to in life, be they relatives or friends or bosses at work or whoever it is, give them hope. And especially when you go into prison, prisoners often have got no hope, especially if it's on a long sentence. They're looking forward to what's going to happen to them in 20 years' time. It's not something you can easily imagine. Give them some kind of hope that going forward, life's not going to be as bad as it is today. So to the parent who's got a very sick child, I've just contributed to a lady totally unknown to me here in the UK, whose sister has got a 12-year-old son with a brain tumour. And he may survive and he may not. Who knows? It's anybody's guess. But for sure they're going for a solution. He's undergoing all the chemotherapy and radiotherapy that the UK can offer, and we can offer lots, but in doing all this, it stops the mum and dad going to work and earning a living. So how do they pay their way through it? So they've opened up a GoFundMe page, and they set a target of £50,000 because that would pay all their living expenses for the next 6 months, by which time their son will either be better, cured, or they won't have him anymore. And at the moment, the total is running at about 62,000. So lots of people, and I'm one of them, have thrown a few pound at it, because when you look at a child of 12 years of age, and I've got one, as you know, you've met him, James lives in my house with us. If I had to consider the option of losing him to anything, it would be more than my body could stand, I think. Mm-hmm. So when I read it of happening to other people, you want to do your little bit. And if by sending them a tenner, it makes all the difference, then that's what I'm going to do, whether I can afford it or not. And of course I can afford £10. Mm-hmm. And you could as well in your situation. No matter how hard up you are, you can always find a £10 note, can't you? Well,
yeah, you can.
$10 is not bad.
Yeah.
So I think you need to give people hope. And that's exactly what we've done. This lady, for her sister, in making £62,000 available, has given her hope that the operations, the chemo and the surgery that he'll have to undertake as a little 12-year-old boy, he's going to go through a lot of pain, a lot of worry, and so is mum and dad. But at the end of it, if it comes out right, at least they won't be bankrupt. At least they'll have something to build on.
Yeah.
To answer your question, hope is the word, Rusty, hope.
Beautiful, beautiful. What I would like to say opposite that to the people who might watch this in the future, who might be currently incarcerated, what I would like to say to them is, I know the yard that you walk on because I've walked that yard as well. I know the sound the keys make when they bounce off the CO's hip because I've heard that too. But what I also know is that you are not your charge. You are worth more than your past, and that change is possible if you want change. And I would like to close that out, and I would like for you to tell one of your jokes. I know you have many, and I know I would like to pick one of my favorites. And I can't remember if it turns a little bit foul, but if it does, I think maybe you could. This is the one about the person who went into the grocery store and asked for some dog food, and they said, "You don't have a dog."
That's right.
I want to share that one.
You may have to edit this a bit then, Rusty, because I've got to think of the joke first of all. So the man goes into a grocery store, and he said to the lady behind the counter, "I'd like to buy this dog food." And the assistant said, "You're not having any dog food because you haven't got a dog." And he went, "Yes, I have." She said, "No, you haven't. Unless you show me your dog, you're not having the dog food." So he went home, got his dog, brought it back to the shop, and she said, "Oh, fair enough." She said, "I didn't know you had a dog," so she sold him the dog food. And the next day he went in and he was trying to buy some cat food. And the woman said, "I'm not selling you the cat food because you haven't got a cat." And he said, "Yes, I have." She said, "No, you haven't. You better prove it." And so he went home and he got his cat and he carried it back to the shop and he showed the woman the cat, and the cat went meow. And the woman said, "Oh, yeah, I can see it's a real cat." "Okay, fair enough then," and sold him some cat food. And the next day he went in and he had a carrier bag in his hand, and she went, "Oh, yeah, what is it you want to buy today?" She said, "Put your hand in the bag." So she put her hand in the bag, and in the bag he put a load of human
shit.
Poo, should you say? Yeah. Shit in your word, is it? Okay.
Yeah, shit.
He put that in the bag, and she went, "Ah, it's horrible. It's shit." And he went, "Yes, please. Could I buy some toilet rolls, please?"
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to hear. Well, John, I really, really appreciate you coming on here. My dear friend, I really appreciate you doing this, sitting down with me today. We're going to go ahead and close this out. And thank you so much, John, for coming on and taking the time. I really do appreciate this.
Pleasure's all mine, Rusty. I always enjoy doing this as well, and we could do it every month as far as I'm concerned, and make a series of it. I just love what you're doing, and I love supporting you in that, and I always will. Thank you.
We have done conferences together. I have been invited on your conference. You have been invited to my conference, which was hosted and live streamed worldwide across the world. So there are no barriers when you have change makers making change. You have been at a live stream. You have been with me. You have watched this grow from an idea to paper to actually me being a registered 501c3. And John, you have been one of my biggest supporters. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, my friend. Thank you so much.
Welcome. And I'll always be here for you. Thanks, Rusty. Cheerio.